Epilogue. It is with great difficulty that I recall my return to Castletown. Alone, I found myself 8 years in the past as a nameless little boy. I returned to the precise moment I pulled the Master Sword from its pedestal. Only this time, the city and the palace were untouched by sword or flame. Ganondorf hadn't pursued me into the sacred realm, and Navi was no longer by my side. After the Triforce rewove the thread of time so that Navi's companion was still alive, I consequently sent her home. At the time, I was unprepared for the grief this decision would bring. Despite this, I do not regret the choice I made. What I do regret is that here, in this realm, the people will never know how close their beloved land came to disaster. They will never understand that, because of my actions, they were given another chance. Yet as I write these words, I hope someday that someone will understand. When last I'd seen Castletown, the city had been a blackened tomb. Even to this day, hear the Redead's pitiful moans as they prowled through that endless night. Not a day goes by that I don't recall their harrowing screams, nor the cries of those who died in that terrible night. My sudden appearance upon the Temple of Time's steps caused quite a stir. I stood atop those stairs, pale and gaunt, an utter wretch. The sight of so many people wandering the streets caught me in a daze, and I barely noticed those turning and pointing towards me. I think the guards were about to usher me on, no doubt thinking I was nothing more than a street urchin. Had I not been so lost amidst my churning thoughts, I might have laughed at the bitter irony. In the space of one day, I had gone from being heralded as a fierce deity to a nameless street urchin. Thankfully, Impa came to my rescue soon after and pulled me back through the curious throng of people. She appeared just as she had on that day I met her in the palace. Her eyes were no longer gone, and her hair was tied into a well-kept ponytail. As she steered me away, I wondered what else had changed. It was an effort not to trip over, as I found it much harder to walk quickly in my 10-year-old body. Impa led me towards the palace, and once we were halfway there, she halted at the mouth of an alley before steering us inside. "Link!" Her voice was gentle, almost motherly. "Where's Navi?" I didn't meet Impa's gaze. The grief of losing Navi, despite knowing she was safe, was still raw as a freshly opened wound. My eye burned as I forced back a fresh wave of tears, and my throat tightened to the point of losing speech. "Link?" Impa placed a hand on my shoulder, and it wasn't until then that I trusted myself to form a coherent reply. I sent her back to the forest." Only after did I look up, and her eyes met mine. "I'm sorry." The sincerity in her voice almost startled me. "You sent her back to be with her companion, didn't you? The one she lost. That was part of what you asked for." After Impa had spoken those words, I realized something unexpected. "You remember?" I gasped, unable to hide my shock. "More than I would like to," Impa answered in a grave tone. Knowing what she meant, I simply nodded. "The others?" "Perhaps, before I could ask," she added. "Zelda does not remember, but..." She drew a deep breath. "All things considered, that is to be expected and is perhaps for the best." I would later discover that for the sages, it was as though they had awoken from a long premonition. The last 8 years, nothing more than a collection of memories. I couldn't help but wonder if they were the sages I had known, or if the Triforce didn't pass on memories of those I left behind. Those thoughts were far from comforting. On the way back to the palace, Impa told me her recollection of the recent events I missed. Much happened as I remembered, except that Ganon's mask vanished 3 days earlier. Forewarned of the impending disaster, Noburu had hastily returned to Castletown. With Impa's help, she had arrested the Gerudo King. Kume and Kutake became the victims of their own sorcery and were banished to another realm. If what Noburu told me is true, they now believe they are the proud owners of a potion shop deep within a swamp, with absolutely no recollection of their former lives. I wish I could have accompanied Navi to the forest, but the sages feared it would make the transition more difficult for the both of us. I remember arguing quite often with Sheik, and still recall some of my stinging remarks with great shame. Until that moment, however, I had never considered arguing with Impa. Predictably, that was a battle I was destined to lose, and lose I did. Once we arrived at the palace, Impa announced to all that I was her ward. No doubt the guards who recalled my expedition over the wall were left bewildered, but they dared not question Impa. For those first few days, I spoke to no one, too dazed, confused, and heartsick for conversation. The food brought to me was left uneaten, and I didn't even rise to tend to the hearth inside my room. Twice, Princess Zelda called on me. I did not return her summons. On the third occasion, she came to my room and knocked on the door. But I could not bear the thought of seeing her. Even now, I can still picture the blade that took her life. Still see her blood pooling upon the black stone floor. And still heard that awful gurgle as she tried in vain to draw a final breath. I never stopped to consider that it wasn't easy on Impa either, for she too bore that memory. I think I lost track of time. I kept to my room so long as I ate so little that what strength I had left began to wane. Impa assigned me tutors in an attempt to distract me, but I was seldom able to focus on my lessons. Twice, I was invited to spar with the young prince, Ewan. On both occasions, I let him win. Yet, even in my weakened state, I could have easily beaten him. I didn't go the third time. It was an effort just to consider getting out of bed. I was determined to ignore everyone. In fact, I even ignored the king's summons, which he did not take kindly to. I only got out of that one without being hauled before him because Impa said I was ill. A healer was sent for, but after much prodding and treating me like a child, she shook her head and left, muttering that I was suffering a sickness of the mind, a sickness she was accustomed to seeing in battle-weary veterans, not children. I recall one morning, some weeks after my return, when I was torn from my dreams by someone pounding on my door. It was latched, but that never seemed to stop Impa from getting inside. Pulling the sheets over me, which were once again drenched in sweat following a nightmare, I attempted to ignore the disturbance. I wanted to be alone, to dwell in my misery. I felt sick with nausea and weaker than a mewling babe. Navi would have chastised me and probably called me a lazy boy while she was at it. Bitterly, I reminded myself she was gone and was no longer mine. I was being selfish, and I knew it. thinking my visitor was a swordmaster, wondering why I hadn't shown up at first light, or Queen Lilius, who sometimes came to see me, or yet another healer. I pretended to be asleep. Unfortunately for my sullen self, my visitors were not convinced.
Link! If you don't open this door right now, I will get Darunia to knock it down!
I was shocked to hear Saria's voice. I think she would have gotten Darunia to do that, but I wasn't planning to find out. Rising from my bed, I threw on a horribly itchy robe over my tunic and undid the latch. Expecting to find Impa and Saria, or even Darunia, however, I had not expected to find all 6 sages and Zelda standing outside the door. Their troubled expressions turned to a mixture of relief and pity. Except for Ruto, that is. "About time!" she exclaimed. Despite everything that had happened, I was still surprised to see how much shorter she was. I decided it wouldn't be wise to mention that.
Do you have any idea how difficult it was convincing my father to send an entire entourage of Zora over here?
She asked with rising ire.
I had to ask Zelda to forge a letter from her father before he would let us. I was worried I would have to come next month with my father's party. It would take him a week to get here.
To my irritation, the sages let themselves into my room. I was somewhat annoyed at this, and I glanced away from Zelda as she entered. I remembered thinking it was a good thing the palace was designed to accommodate Goron dignitaries, or else Darunia would have been left standing outside. Naburu brought a tray of cakes, looking immensely pleased with herself. I guessed why. Food often vanished from the palace kitchens when she was around. Impa came in last, and offered a not-so-apologetic smile. A servant scurried in afterward, hurriedly opening the shutters to let in the morning air. She began cleaning the room, scowling at its state and muttering under her breath until Impa cast her a sharp glare.
What? What are you all doing here?
I asked, ignoring the servant who was still scowling. Well, since you seem so insistent on avoiding us, we decided to come to you, Ruto said. You forgot to return my sapphire, remember?
Your?
I could not recall having it, and was almost outraged at the accusation. Ryaru cleared his throat.
I returned it on your behalf. I am sure that Ruto bears no ill will towards you for its delayed return.
The disapproval in Ryaru's voice was plain. Judging by the frown he directed at Ruto, he was clearly unimpressed by her woeful attempt to break me from my self-pity.
We came to see you,
Saria said.
We've been worried about you.
I'm fine, I lied, hating how harsh I sounded. Nice try, kid, Naburu said.
But you're a terrible liar, and you look like a Dodongo's breakfast,
Darunia snorted. The sound so loud I nearly jumped. Naburu ignored him and went on. Impa told us you locked yourself in here. If you stay much longer, you will miss the spring festival. I walked over to my chair by the cold hearth and sat. I don't want to go. The sages exchanged anxious looks, and when they directed their gazes towards me, I turned away. Impa said something to the servant, and the girl bustled out of the room without question. Have something to eat. You'll feel better. Naboo proffered the tray of cakes. I brought plenty. Are they from the kitchens? Impa asked. Naburu only grinned. It wasn't like they were about to run out, she said innocently. Besides, I have a reputation to keep. You like that people call you the Gerudo Thieves? Zelda asked. No, Naburu admitted. But I might as well act the part. Besides, I only steal from the rich. I think Naburu is joking, Impa assured her. I remember thinking that the silly banter was meant for my benefit. It didn't work.
I hear you jousted with Prince Ewan, Ruto tried. Zelda told me he beat you twice. Link let him win, said Zelda. Didn't you?
Hurting a prince is a good way to get your head axed, I said coldly, almost wincing at my words. That's a bit black, don't you think? Naburu asked mildly. It's the truth, I replied.
My father would never do something like that, Zelda said, sounding offended. I don't think he meant it, Zelda, Impa reassured her. It was then I realized how childish I was beginning to sound. I'm sorry, I said in a quiet tone. I looked up at them, still trying to avoid eye contact with Zelda. You know, Link, Navi misses you, Saria said quietly. We could go to the forest if you prefer somewhere a bit quieter. She'd like to see you, even if it's only for a few hours. I think it would do you both some good. I stared into the fireplace. The cold hearth seemed a fitting analogy to how I felt. All the energy I once possessed was gone, burned away until there was nothing left but ashes. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. Impa sighed. Zelda, wait outside, please. But now! And I will know if you attempt to listen through the keyhole. That goes for your brother, too. I heard Zelda leave the room, and I looked up in time to see the princess glance at me. That horrid memory stirred again, and I shivered. I know you're hurting, Link, Impa said, almost soothingly. We all remember what happened. All of it. You're not alone in this. And we want to help you. Except Ruto. She just wants her stone back, Naburu said. I did not! Ruto snapped. She leapt off the bed, webbed hands on her hips as she glowered at Naburu. Do you have any idea what it's like waking up with memories of a queen no one remembers? I keep thinking people will follow my orders. Now, all they do is laugh behind my back whenever I try to boss them around. Ruto, you've always expected that everyone will obey your orders. How's this any different? Saria asked. Neither she or Naburu looked in the least bit bothered by the Zora's outburst. Seeing that neither sage was riled by her outcry, Ruto sat back down on the bed. It was only after Ruto and Saria's brief exchange that I found the strength to look up. Shame sickened me as I realized that I had completely ignored them. How are you still a sage, Ruto? I asked, trying to avoid the painful realization they were dealing with their own memories. I had known that, but I'd never considered how difficult it must be for them. Ruto shifted on the bed. I'm not technically... My father chose another Zora to take the position until I'm of age. Who? You haven't met them, but they're not as competent at magic as I was, Ruto sniffed.
Ganondorf was captured by Naburu and the Gerudo, Rauru said. When you touched the Triforce, it dispelled his control over the minds of the king, his council, and the Gerudo. He is to be executed on the eve of the Spring Festival.
It would be best if you remained here, Impa said, given what you have already been through. I wanted to object to that too, but there was no changing Impa's mind. I understand, I said. I'm glad, Impa replied. I do, however, expect you to attend the Spring Festival. I think perhaps a visit to the woods will do you some good. I thought you said I couldn't go back, I said. I did not mean indefinitely, Impa replied. Navi is no doubt wondering why you have kept away for so long. I realized that neither Saria, Impa, nor the other sages were going to give up until they had dragged me out of this room. I sighed before admitting, "All right, I'll go."
How about we go hunting in the meantime?
Saria asked. Saria smiled, and a part of me stirred. I felt so numb to that I'd forgotten what it was like to enjoy the company of friends. Navi's departure had left a hole inside of me, as though someone had ripped a piece of my soul away. It has long been my belief that when two companions are as close as each other as Navi and I were, they give each other a piece of their soul to treasure. So it was with Navi and I. It was foolish of me to think that she intentionally left. I let her go on purpose. I was a Hylian, and she belonged with her kind and the Kokiri. "You hate hunting," I pointed out to Saria, not particularly eager about the whole idea. I had witnessed so much bloodshed that the thought of causing more, even if it were just to gain food, abhorred me.
What about fishing?
Saria asked.
Really?
Rudo asked.
How did sitting on a riverbank with a stick ever get called fishing? It looks so boring. You have to hope the fish is dumb enough to get caught. There is no skill in it whatsoever.
"We find it works quite well," Saria said mildly.
Why don't you do all the work and catch everything if you're so good at it, Rudo?
"I'll think about it," Rudo replied, folding her arms and staring at Saria in irritation. "Link?" Saria asked. "I'd rather not," I said flatly. I felt a twinge of guilt in her hurt expression. So I added, "Thanks for asking, though." I could still see the concern in her eyes. For a moment, I felt bad for refusing, but Saria nodded, accepting my decision. The sages spoke at length about a number of things, and Impa had a servant bring a horrible broth I was forced to endure. It seemed I had eaten so little that my stomach would accept little else. Not even Naburu's cakes. Then, after Naburu complained that my room could have given a Yeti frostbite, Impa sent for a servant, and soon had them scurrying off to fetch a bucket of wood for the fire. I remember after the sages left, each promising that they would soon return, that Zelda came back into my room, catching me off guard. "Link?" she asked cautiously. Again, I avoided her gaze. I don't want to talk right now," I said quietly. "Please." She didn't go away. Instead, she sat on the bed where Naburu had perched before. "Impa has not told me much, but I can tell by the way you avoid my eyes." I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "You won't even look at me, and even Impa can't meet my eyes without pain. Something happened to me in that future you came from, didn't it?" I cursed my inability to keep myself from holding back the tears from my eye. I rubbed my cheek with a grimy sleeve. In my mind, I could see that blade again. I was sure I was going to be ill. "Please, just leave me, Zelda." "It is okay," she continued. "I understand if you do not want to tell me." She turned towards the door. When she was halfway there, she paused. "You know, Impa says it helps to write things down if they're hurting you. Maybe you could write about what happened. It might make it easier." I snorted disdainfully. "Even if I could, nobody would believe it." "I would," she said. I didn't want to inflict the kind of pain that knowledge would cause her. I didn't even think, so young as she was, that she would understand. Besides, she didn't need to understand how. In the future I'd left behind. Nearly all of her family and many others she'd known had died. Nor did she need to know about the horrors that both Sheik and I had witnessed as we struggled to free Hyrule from Ganondorf's tyranny.
It doesn't matter,
I said, feeling irrationally angry. I just wanted to be alone. I knew Zelda meant well, but she was bringing too many memories close to the surface.
I can't read or write anyway.
I can teach you, Zelda replied, if you want. For the first time, I met her eyes.
You would? If you want to, Zelda answered. I am sure Impa would not mind. Besides, it is not that hard.
Fighting the part of me, wanting her to go away. I blinked back tears and managed.
That would mean a lot, thank you.
Zelda smiled, and then with a sweep of her dress, made for the door. She was almost there before she halted in her stride.
By the way, the Queen has a gift for you.
She turned and smiled.
It would be impolite to refuse, and I think you'll like it.
Without another word, she strode out into the corridor beyond. It wasn't until after Zelda left that I realized what she'd left behind on the bed. The Ocarina of Time. I took it, tried to make myself look presentable, and went in search of the Queen. Her gift turned out to be a young spirited hound. Every boy needs one, she told me, but best you keep him out of the way of the cooks. I thanked her, letting the erratic canine dance around my feet in a dizzying circle, its tail wagging all the while. Bidding the Queen farewell, I led my newfound companion back to my room. Spring Festival came quickly that year, and I did see Navi again. She was furious at my decision to send her back to the forest without even asking. Saria managed to calm her down, helping her understand that I had given her another chance to be with Doran as was meant to be. I returned to Hyrule Castle in time to partake in the celebration of the new spring. It was a noisy affair, in which I dressed in a ridiculous outfit of a royal blue that Zelda insisted was perfectly normal. It did not feel normal. The sages appeared towards the feast's end, but their tidings weren't glad. They had accomplished their task, but not without difficulty. The inexperienced Zora sage had nearly botched Ganondorf's execution at the cost of his own life. Ganondorf still had some allies in the desert. Following the Gerudo Council's decision to strip him of his royal title, his allies had made themselves scarce, and the Buru was left with the arduous task of rounding them up. It seems that at least one of Ganondorf's supporters had convinced the Water Sage to get too close to the former Gerudo King. What happened next remains unclear. Somehow, Ganondorf attacked the Zora Sage's mind. Far weaker than the others, the Sage of Water was quickly overcome. The execution required the 7 sages' combined effort, including the mage who went in Zelda's place. Instead, there were only 6, and the binding spell on Ganondorf snapped. The result was nearly disastrous. Fortunately, Riaru had already instructed the sages on what to do should the execution go awry. Having recalled Ganondorf's stubborn refusal to stay dead, Riaru had devised a second plan. It was fortunate that he did. There lies within the Sacred Realm a desolate, isolated region that no spirit will willingly wander near. A prison cast in endless twilight that neither mortal or god can escape. Such was Ganondorf's fate, to be cast into that darkness. It is ironic that after all the effort to keep him out, Ganondorf's wish to enter the Sacred Realm was granted. King Nohansen, who witnessed the botched execution, was left to contend with an outraged emissary of Gerudo and Zora. Both demanded to know why things had gone so wrong, To this day, Rudo regrets that she could not have gone in her representative's stead. I know that if she had, it would have been her blood spilled upon the sands of Arbiter's ground. If that had happened, the Zora would have probably turned on their Hylian allies in retribution. Zelda kept her promise. She eventually taught me how to read and write in between her lessons, and many a night was spent beside one of the hearths of the Great Wall. As the years dragged on, I saw less of her and the sages as they became wrapped in their various duties. The nightmare still haunted me, and without potions to deaden my mind, sleep eluded me. In time, I healed. Not completely. A scar is never as good as the flesh it replaces. I became far too dependent upon potions and herbs to stave off my nightly terrors. So much so that I began having tremors that sometimes caused me to collapse. Impa warned me that taking healing potions for years on end would have side effects, but I didn't listen to her. Sometimes those old scars still hurt, or so it seemed. Sometimes. I'm not sure if the pain was nothing more than the product of tormented soul. I could not wander through the castle, nor the streets of Castletown, without revisiting those memories. And I needed something to dull my memory. Seeking solace, I sought out Malin in a small hamlet of Lanlan, although much of history was rewritten. She at least remembered me. I think my scarred appearance horrified her at first. But in time, as Talon agreed to take me on as a farmhand, she took little notice to them. I didn't mind the work, as it gave me less time to think, which was something I did far too often. Eventually, I won back Malin's affections. I was still sworn to Impa's service, and frequently made trips back and forth to the castle whenever she summoned me. I was there the day Zelda was crowned queen. She married Prince Eugene, who thankfully was less of a brat than the spoiled boy I'd heard of. As of Queen Leela's second son, he was born without any complications and grew into a handsome young man. After Zelda's coronation, I slipped away from the palace life. I was never particularly fond of it. The lavish corridors and lifeless stone walls carried none of the vibrant colors of my childhood home. Even the gardens seemed far too tidy and tame. Fake even, though. I'm sure Zelda would not approve of such sentiment. I still venture to the woods occasionally. There is a place amidst the ancient guardians, not far from the forest temple. I enjoy visiting. Even though the Kokiri have long since moved to other groves deeper into the woods, or traveled across the mountains to tend to forests in lands beyond, there is a place that Saria and I call our own. I know that if I ever need her and play her song, she will come. She never strays far from the Kokiri's home. There are still times when I wake up expecting to find Navi nearby, to hear her berate me for sleeping in, or calling, "Hey, listen!" Even that would have been better than the emptiness that plagued me. She won't return. I know that now. But I also know that she is at peace, and for that I am content. As a wise man once told me, wherever there is a meeting, a parting is sure to follow. However, that parting need not last forever. Whether a parting be forever or merely for a short time, is for us to decide. Malin has taken an apt for her father's trade. Her horses are amongst the finest stock in Hyrule, and she is more than pleased to proclaim that to anyone who listens. Besides the sages, she is the only one who knows what happened in that future I averted. I spared Malin the details of what happened to her.
Someday, I am certain our children will wonder about my nightmares or the tremors that sometimes seize me in their grip.
Halvard knows what happened too. His close watch over me after I went back in time, discreet as he was, left me with little doubt about the other sages had sent him to watch over me. He told me Majora was gone, feigning dismay. He'd rambled about losing a precious artifact which had been destroyed. Upon realizing I knew what he was talking about, he feigned surprise and assured me it was nothing to be concerned about. His gaze kept drifting to the right side of my face, and his grin turned into an icy grimace. He knew. Winter's end is close, and evening draws near. The candle burns low as I write these words, and my fingers are stained with ink. The tray of food Malin brought me has long since gone cold. She truly hates it when I do that, and I will most likely cop an earful. My dog lies sprawled out before the crackling hearth, no doubt lost in dreams of hunting a rabbit or squirrel. It is for my children that I decide to go on. But as I watch the 4 boys and their little sister play, I wonder how long this peace I brought them will hold. For I know that despite Riaru's efforts, Ganondorf will one day return. I wish there was a way I could make sure we are ready. And I will wonder if these words are truly enough for the days to come. He will return, but not in my lifetime. I know the hero will be reborn, and hope that perhaps these words may guide him upon his path. I hope that his task will not be as difficult as mine, but of that, amongst many things, I cannot be certain. For the burden of the hero is not light, and I would not wish it upon anyone. In my heart, despite the fact that Ganon will one day return, I am certain we will be ready. The wheel of time turns, and memories become legends that ride upon the winds of time. From the writings of Link Aldemir, the hero of time.
That's it? Startled by the question, the bleary-eyed youth looked up from the pages of the yellow tome. Somewhere in the shadows, beyond the light of his hearth, his companion muttered a string of obscenities under her breath. She didn't move into the firelight, but the blonde-haired youth was no stranger to this odd behavior. The boy almost smirked, certain that his guest's irritable muttering was because she wasn't able to translate the tome herself. "That's it," he answered her, before looking back down at the tome. "You went through all the trouble of finding that book, claiming it would help us, and then what?" the girl asked incredulously. "It hasn't told us anything useful." "Actually, it has." "Oh yeah? Like what?" she chastised. "This is the last time that I ever let you take us on a wild cuckoo chase." The youth smiled, doubting his companion would understand. There were some things that he always wanted answers to. Answers that nobody in Orden could give him. He stirred the fire's coals, and then turned to collect the dusty old tome. He set it on the shelf near his bed, and for a long time, he stared at it, lost in rumination. The book was one of few copies of the man's journals outside of the palace. The hero's stories were a favorite of minstrels, and nobody seemed quite certain whether they were real or merely a legend that emerged with time. Only now, the youth realized they were true. Shad and Russell had not been lying. They were real. He felt as if an enormous weight lifted from his shoulders. He wasn't alone. Thank you. He stared at the tome for the longest time, even prompting a concerned question from his guest. Just as he answered, his sharp hearing caught the faint whisper of paws outside, and he glanced out the window, certain they were being watched. There, in the pale moonlight, he caught a glimpse of a wolf with golden fur, its one eye watching his small dwelling. Link's horse was either unperturbed by the newcomer or couldn't see it. As if aware it was being watched, the wolf slinked away between the trees, vanishing into the night. Link knew it would be back. It was watching him. Always. The youth collapsed upon the bed, his tired mind far from the confines of his cozy little home. He stared up at the ceiling, his mind wandering to a forgotten time, to an ancient grove, and a boy without a fairy. The end.